Hello, everybody, and welcome to Identifying Candidate Behaviors to Help Predict Success. I'm Mike Coffey, President of Imperative Information Group. If you're watching this webinar, you probably already have some exposure to me through either you're an Imperative client and we're helping you deliver excellent candidates, qualified, fully vetted employees, I guess, to your organization. Or you listen to Good Morning HR, the podcast that I publish each week, where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Or maybe you see me speak at SHRM conferences, or you found out about me on the internet, who knows? But I want to just welcome everybody. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about myself or Imperative because we have a lot to cover today. But I just want to thank everybody for being here. This webinar is pre-approved for an hour of HRCI and SHRM recertification credit. And near the end of the webinar, those of you who are watching this as a recording and are not watching it live, we'll see a slide near the end that includes the code where you need to go to imperative imperativeinfo.com to request your recertification information, and all those instructions will be in the notes below the webinar. But if you're watching this live, what you're going to get is an email probably on Monday with the HRCI and SHRM recert information. It'll be a link to ask you to complete a quick survey. Just tell me how I did and give me any feedback, and then you'll get the recert information then. So let's get started. In this session, we're going to discuss quite a few things that come up in a lot of my conversations with clients. And I just will warn you up front, a lot of this is gospel according to Coffey stuff. Just as I've worked with clients on their employee selection process over the last 20 plus years, some of the things that I consistently see and that we really consistently struggle with, both on the employee selection side and on, unfortunately, the employee relations side, when we're actually having to exit people, we're going to talk about a lot of those things because it often has to do with behavior. And so we're going to talk about why behaviors matter when you're evaluating employee candidates, how to determine and document which behaviors are truly predictive of success in a particular role and inside your particular organization, how the job description and the job posting can be used to attract the ideal candidate and maybe repel those candidates who don't really have the behavior sets that you found or lead to success in your organization, how the employee application process can help identify candidates' behaviors just as they go through your application process, how cognitive and behavioral assessments can help sort your candidates based on their behavior assessment, their behavior traits and their behavior styles, how you can use the behavior information that you've gleaned from assessments and the rest of the process into your behavioral event interviewing process, and how you can make your BEI or your structured interviews a lot more effective by thinking in advance about this particular interviewee, this particular candidate's behavior that they've demonstrated to us so far, and what the job looks for, and have deeper conversations around some of those things. And then how your final selection process and your verification and background check process can also help identify key behaviors that would reflect on whether the person's really going to be successful in the role. So let's get started with all that. So this is the traditional hiring method, and unfortunately, many organizations are still using something very similar to this, and it's what drives me crazy about a lot of the job posting boards. I won't name any by name, but they tend to reduce candidates down to what are their credentials, what degrees, certifications, things like that do they have, and how much experience do they have. And if we're really being honest, a degree from 25 years ago often isn't as relevant as we give it credit for, because a lot's changed in a lot of fields in the last 25 years. And experience is really what we're really looking at. It's not really experience we're measuring. What we're measuring is tenure, and we're using tenure, the ability to stick it out and stay with a job or in a chosen career for some period of time. We're using that as a proxy for actual experience that would be helpful in our organizations. And so, certainly since the late 80s, probably throughout my whole HR career, we've been talking about knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. And some organizations have done a really good job of defining for specific roles what knowledge, skills, and abilities, what we traditionally consider competencies, are really key for a position. And those competencies are really important. And certainly I came out of healthcare HR for a good bit of my frontline HR experience career, and competencies were key there, right? We're delivering healthcare, and you had to have, objective ways of measuring individuals' competencies in the clinical setting, and making sure that you were only putting people who were safe and competent in a role, especially if it was patient facing. But now we've seen competencies expand across a lot of industries. I don't think we still do a very good job of measuring them. And I think a lot of organizations, your hiring managers especially, fall back on, away from knowledge, skills, and abilities, and just fall back on their credentials and their experience. But we can hope that, that continues to grow. But we talk about knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, a lot. But the idea of knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, the OC in KSOCs, often gets dropped out, and or we don't really know what we're talking about there. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. And in my experience, those other characteristics, which often boil down to the person's core motivations, their core behaviors, what brings them to a place in their workday where they're thriving, where they're engaged, where they really are. They know they're in the right place, in the right seat, and they're doing something that's meaningful to them in an environment that feels safe to them, that feels nurturing, or whatever it is that they're looking for. Those core behaviors that are natural to that person because of all their life experiences, because, quite honestly, because of some of their genetics, those things we underplay. We don't pay enough attention to, but I think we know that they're key to our hiring decisions, or at least the success of that employee, because how often is it as HR professionals that we have to exit somebody from the organization involuntarily, and it's because they couldn't actually do the job. They didn't have the competency to do the job. In my experience, that is much more rare than the circumstance where they don't want to do the job, they're unhappy in the job, their performance is reflective of that, or they're just engaging in bad behavior, and so we hurt ourselves and we hurt our organizations if we aren't paying attention, and we're being unfair to the applicant, to be quite honest, if we aren't paying attention to what makes somebody successful in this role behavior-wise, and how do we communicate that to the applicant so that they can help us select them, or they can self-select out of the process. And how do we evaluate those same behaviors and identify those behaviors inside of a particular applicant? So I'm going to argue pretty strongly today that those natural and learned behaviors are those other characteristics, those important other characteristics that we talk about with knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. So prepare yourself, because I'm about to say the F word. And I know we get a little squeamish about it, but it's become very, I guess, common to dismiss or even deride the term fit in employment circles in the last 5 to 10 years. And I understand why, because if fit, when we're talking about employment, means that this person shares a background or interest or even behaviors that aren't related to success in the role, then what we're really saying is fit is just saying we want somebody who's going to be a clone of everybody else in the organization, and it's going to kill diversity and our ability to have a variety of thought patterns, a variety of experiences to bring to the table and all that. And I agree completely there. When we're talking about fit, the way that, unfortunately, probably a number of your managers think about fit, is this somebody I want to go get a beer with? Or is this somebody who's, going to participate in our Friday night bowling league, those kinds of things, whatever you've got. I don't know if anybody has bowling leagues anymore. But if that's what we're talking about fit, then yeah, we need to get rid of that concept. But I think a better definition of fit means building teams that ensure that each employee is in a role where they are thriving. And this is primarily an employee selection process or employee selection issue. You're not going to, I hope, start designing each job around a preferred employee. What we're going to say is, this is our organization, this is the role, this is what makes people successful in this role in our organization. Let's go find people who have these things, whatever they are, and it's certainly knowledge, skills, and abilities, but also that behavior, those core behaviors that make somebody successful. For instance, and I'm going to use this example quite a bit today. In a fast-paced data entry role. Okay, so we're not talking about, and I chose data entry primarily because it's a standard role many organizations have, and it's not really specified, specific to a certain industry. And we all have those kind of admin clerical roles, but even those are going to vary from company to company, even inside the same industry. But let's say we've got this fast-paced data entry role where there's very little interpersonal interaction. This is somebody who is sitting in front of 2 computer monitors all day, and they are taking paper that comes in from some source, and they're inputting that information into some structured, computer database or something. And there's just a ton of it. Maybe it's purchase orders, maybe it's customer inquiries, whatever it is. They're getting all this data and they are entering it into a system. Or maybe they've got 2 systems and they're looking at one on one screen and another on the other, and the 2 systems don't talk, and they're manually putting that information in there, whatever it is. That process where they're just hammering on a keyboard all day long, that would kill me. I couldn't do it. But there are people who love to do that. But if they have, we got to work real fast, you're never caught up. There's a lot of work coming in here, and you'll leave today, and tomorrow there'll be another, 8 full hours of doing data entry. And we've got very high accuracy standards. You got to be right every time. There's just very little room for failure. That is not going to be a fit of a job for someone who prefers to spend much of their time looking for ways to improve processes, who likes to collaborate with other people, focus on the big picture, kind of be a visionary, or somebody like me. Like I said, I would not thrive in that data entry role. But that would, and so if you put somebody like me in that role, I would fail. And I would argue it's primarily on the hiring manager, on HR, whoever the decision makers were, who would hire somebody like me for that job. Even though certainly I've got the whatever, whatever skills and experience you want. I know how to use the computer. I I can read. I've got a decent comprehension of the English language. I could do that job for about 3 or 4 hours a month, maybe. And but I could probably do it well enough to get past the interview process. And then what are we going to do when on day 2 I'm already hating my job? And how long can I modify my behavior before my core desire and who I really am, and I see things over there that, oh, we should really fix that. That's something that should be done, or here's a better way to do this. Sometimes companies don't want every employee coming with a better way to do things. What they want is their employees to put tab A and slide A all day long. We don't want to have that conversation over and over. Why do we do this? And hopefully your company does have some process where people can raise those issues, but that's not their core job. And so somebody who just wants to reinvent the wheel, and my team hates it when I get involved in anything on the operation side, because that's what I do. I say, hey, why do we do it this way? And I start asking those questions, and sometimes it leads to real improvement. Often I think it probably does. I think they agree, but that's kind of disruptive to the organization. And maybe the efficiencies I'm gaining from every time I tweak a little thing aren't moving the organization forward, because they're costing us more than they're saving us. So, while some of those behaviors that don't fit in that particular job that's really, focused on data entry are beneficial, sometimes we need to say, if those are the really strong motivators and the strongest behaviors in who you are in this role, you're not the best candidate for this job. We need to find the candidate who can do that. So when we're talking about behavioral traits or behavioral characteristics, sometimes we hear them referred to as personality traits. I think they all overlap. We're talking about patterns of behavior, thought, motivation, and even emotion that are relatively consistent and stable over time. Some of the science out there, and again, this is psychology and social science, and there are crises of repeatability or the ability to demonstrate. Some of these studies can be confirmed when there's a term for it when they're repeated, but I can't remember what it's called. But that some of that can't be always confirmed. But generally, people by sometime between the age of 13 and 18 are pretty much set in their ways. Things don't always, we're not always able to change our core behavior. Now, where people primarily do it, as I understand it from my reading, is where there's something really traumatic in their life, and that basically will begin to maybe rewire how they see the world and what their responses are. And I think we've seen some of that in COVID over the last 3 years. And I think that's what a lot of companies are experiencing with their employees who are coming back to work with very different priorities. We're not coming back to work because we've been at work for 3 years. We just did it differently. But I think, how we approach work and what employees are looking for from in an employer-employee relationship are different. And we're seeing some of that because I think COVID was more transformative, maybe more traumatic to a lot of people than maybe we're giving it credit for sometimes. And I think, and just because I spend most of my time talking to business leaders, small business owners, and HR professionals, I know it's been traumatic on the HR side of the world. HR was asked to become medical experts, sanitation experts, air filtration experts on all kinds of government programs that were rolled out overnight. And we were at the same time dealing with the same issues that our employees were dealing with. And so I know it was, for a lot of HR folks, it's been, it was, if traumatic's too strong a word, it was extremely stressful for a long period of time. And I know a lot of HR people who have re-examined what they're doing and the kind of environment they want to work in. So we can modify our behavior for certain periods of time, but it causes more and more stress. And in fact, I had years ago an employee who, when we first started doing assessments for our whole organization, behavioral assessments, I was working with a consultant, and he went through all those assessments with me, and he pulled out this one woman's profile, and he said, "Tell me about her." And I said, "Well, she's she's an administrator. She's our admin clerical person here. We're a smaller company then." And he said, "Well, what's her relationship with other employees?" And I said, "Well, she's kind of grumpy, but she gets the job done, and she's not disruptive." And he said, "She's about to blow a gasket." This is, just the distance between what her natural behaviors were and the behaviors that were required for that particular job. It was just this giant chasm. And I thought, well, I think maybe he's overstating it. But I sat down with her and I said, "Hey, so let's go through your behavioral assessment. Let's talk about this." And she read through it, and we started talking. I said, "So how does this line up with the, how you see your role?" And she started crying, and she said, I love working here, but this job is killing me. I didn't realize when I accepted the job how difficult it was going to be to just to do this kind of work all day long. And I really need a lot more social interaction. I need, we talked about what her other needs were. And ultimately she decided to exit the organization after we had that conversation. That was kind of bad on me, because I felt like I should have recognized that earlier in the relationship. And I think I'm more aware of it in the subsequent, I don't know how many employees, 100, that we've had come through the organization in the last 15 years. But I can tell you that for her, it was definitely stressful. And, but she knew she needed a paycheck too. And so when employees are in that position where it's not a good fit because of who they are and their way of doing things and their way of looking at the world and what they need as far as satisfaction and how they achieve that out of work, that's a problem. And so we got to, we need to remember that how somebody's wired, what their core behavior traits are, they affect the way that employees interact with each other, how they communicate, how they collaborate, how they approach their work. How they're going to respond to their work environment, what their roles and responsibilities are, how they respond to different kinds of incentives or rewards in your organization makes a giant difference based on their behavior. And just what the rest of their workplace interactions are with customers or vendors or whoever they're talking about on the phone. So behaviors are, on their face, I think we recognize that the behaviors are really key. And there is, as I've kind of mentioned, there's science out there, go science, but there are a lot of papers out there that suggest, and a lot of them focus primarily on management. And there's been a lot of study about what makes a successful manager. And what I find interesting about that is they're usually looking at managers across multiple organizations. And so it's not just managers in this one company. And some of the smaller studies are just one company, and then they do a meta-analysis where they look at them and they kind of figure out what the commonalities are across those different groups. And I think that's probably somewhat helpful. But I do think every organization is unique because you've got a different culture, you've got a different business model, even if you're in the same industry. And so even at the leadership level, I think what works in one organization doesn't in another. And we've probably seen it in our own organizations when we've hired somebody from outside and brought them in, and they were a great project manager at this company. And so we're going to put them in here as a project manager. And then they just really struggle. And that is all about, assuming they were truly competent and all of that to start with, then that's all about what their behavior sets are. And I think we really need to focus in as much as we can on figuring out what makes somebody really successful in our organization. Now, Google is a very large organization. And back in 2012, I think it was, they did a study called Project Oxygen, and they've continued to build it up. And now and I think 2018 or 2019, they released this set of the behaviors that make somebody a successful manager at Google. And these were their top performing managers. And look where technical skills is on this list. This is the thing that jumps out at you if you're paying attention to the behavior concept. Key technical skills to help advise the team. That's number 8 on the list. And Google's a giant tech company, and tech skills are number 8 on the things that make somebody a really good manager. That's pretty impressive. Being a good coach, empowering the team, creating an inclusive environment, is productive and results oriented, is a good communicator, helps work with career development on different on their team, has a clear vision, strategy for the team. All of that comes before basic STEM requirements that you would think that would be right at the top. Now, you've got to have those at Google, obviously, to even get in the door, but that's not what made somebody a great manager there. But I would argue that probably in a smaller tech organization that doesn't have the giant budgets and the team size that Google has, you've got probably have managers who have to have a lot more hands-on, who are actually touching keyboards and really affecting code, who are mentoring employees on their technical skills to get them up and training them in those additional skills. Then probably at that organization, that core competency of programming, being a technical leader, is probably higher on the list of what makes somebody a good manager. So again, it goes back to the idea that every organization is unique. So how do we decide which behaviors are really key to a position? Because we've talked about the organization, and then we've got the position itself, and how do we know what behaviors are there? And we have to be really careful here, because this is a great way to introduce unnecessary and unfair bias into the hiring decision. I've got a whole webinar on the website called Mitigating Bias in the Employee Selection Process. And if that's a concern in your organization, I really suggest you go look at it. I think it's pretty thoughtful, mostly because I steal other people's ideas in it, but it's a really good primer on thinking about how bias, especially management bias and employee selection processes, can bias the hiring decision. So we want to make sure we're not introducing new bias in to the hiring decision as we walk through what are these behaviors we're looking for. And so we need to start with a culture analysis of our organization. Which behaviors does the organization really currently incentivize, select for, incentivize, and reward? So, what are those behaviors? Maybe we need to change those, but if we know we're not going to change those anytime soon, that, this is, we wish we weren't such a competitive environment. We wish that, that our accounting firm didn't have this dog eat dog environment where everybody is scrambling to get a partner role, and so everybody's trying to outwork everybody, and everybody's working 50, 60, 70 hours a week all year long, not just during tax season. And it's just we know we're burning people out, but this is just the environment, and we know we're not going to be able to change that. Maybe our current leadership's not going to go for it, or whatever reason, we're not changing that. And that's not the culture you're going to change overnight. So if we're not going to do that, then let's at least be honest and understand culturally, this is where we are. This is the behavior that gets you ahead here. This is the behavior that's going to lead to the kind of success and satisfaction. And these are the kind of people that can work well in our environment and succeed in our environment, where people with different behavior sets will get burned out, maybe crushed under the heels of other employees, or at least just, hate their job. And so we need to start with that culture analysis and get the big picture. What are the things that really make people successful here? But then we need to take it down to a job analysis level. And let's really look at the role and understand how we define success for this role. And what are those key components of success? What are the things that someone has to do? What are the outcomes that say, okay, this person is successful, but this person over here wasn't? And then we sit down and we hypothesize. And let me take a pause here. You'll see my slides are just pictures for the most part. The next few slides are pretty wordy, but most part they're just pictures. But when you get the notes from the presentation, the slides are just pictures, and there's a whole page of notes on most of these pages. So you don't have to write everything I'm saying down here. You'll have notes to cover it all. So we've done a job analysis. Now we need to go back and come up with our idea, our hypothesis about, based on the company culture and the role that in the job analysis we just did on the role, what behaviors do we expect to be relevant to this job? And when you do a lot of the reading around this, that's kind of where often the reading stops. Okay, they just assume that we are going to be good at saying, okay, this is a job that where they've got to produce a lot of work, and they're constantly under stress. So we need somebody with this behavior set and this behavior and this behavior. But in reality, just talking from my own experience, I've owned this company for almost 25 years now, and I can tell you that what I think would be the behaviors in our key role, the analyst role, what I originally thought, and what even my leadership team thought were going to be the key characteristics of behavior for the people we're hiring, I found that in fact some of it was wrong. And so I think it's important that we understand what we think that we set that up and say, this is what we expect, this is our hypothesis, but we need to test it. We need to go try to verify it. And so what we did, and I think what other organizations are doing too, are looking at the successful employees in that role. What makes them successful? And look for those commonalities across all the people in that role. And I'm talking about not just the current employees. If you've been doing behavioral assessments for some time, or even if you just have what you think are pretty reliable job performance ratings and performance reviews and things like that, 360 feedback over time, even for employees who are no longer here, but those were people that we considered by our objective metrics were top performers. Get all that information together and start looking for those commonalities. If you don't have a lot of historical data, maybe we start by doing 360 reviews and maybe behavioral assessments. And if we've really got objective criteria to know who our top performers are, then maybe we start looking for those commonalities there. But just because they're commonalities doesn't mean those are the things that are running the success. So there could be successful outliers. Okay, so there could be people who are really successful but who don't match any of these competencies, and we need to pay attention to those. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But there may be some commonalities across those highly successful people that are just irrelevant. Like they may be all white males over 40, and maybe that's just coincidence, or it's just reflective of some other bias in the organization. But it's not; those aren't the demographics that are making people successful. And likewise, having somebody who loses their anger, loses their temper easily, consistently. Maybe that's a cultural thing, but maybe that's not what's driving. Those aren't the behaviors that are driving success. Maybe these people would be even more successful if they didn't lose their cool all the time, or maybe they're successful, but they're impacting other performers who would be more successful if they didn't lose their cool quite so often. So we have to make sure that it makes sense that these things, that we can see what those correlations are, the behaviors that we see as commonalities across those top performers, and what those people actually deliver and how. And so we don't want to get in a position where all we're doing is replicating bad behavior or behavior that maybe not be bad, but isn't relevant. And so we really want to spend the time to dig into what those behaviors that we really think are going to drive performance are. And then let's go look at the other group of employees, the less successful employees in our team, those average or even below average contributors. What are their behaviors, and where are they on the same level as behavior in some behaviors as the strong performers, but in other areas, the strong performers have this behavior and this these lower performers have the opposite behavior, or much weaker in that behavior set. And then we can start to see, okay, this seems truly relevant because we can tie it back to specific parts of the job, and we can see that the successful people have this behavior. They engage in this, they pay attention to it, this is what motivates them or whatever it is. And these folks over here don't necessarily have that. And so we come up with our core, but we also need to look, as I said a minute ago, look at our outliers, because what happens, sometimes we have this idea that these are, here's the core set of things. And if we just use these as our guideline and we just hire only to these 5 behaviors, we are going to, knock the ball out of the park every time. Well, it's not going to work that way, first of all, because sometimes you'll hire exactly what you think you need and those people don't work out. But also what you'll see is that you're going to have some outliers in your organization who are exceptional performers, maybe despite the fact that they've got certain behaviors. And we've certainly had those in our organization. And then you decide, okay, so is this something I can replicate, or is this a one-off situation? Because you could have 2 or 3 different kinds of behavior combinations that help somebody be successful in the organization. But then you have to say, okay, how many of these do I want? If everybody wants to be a leader, everybody wants to be in charge, and nobody wants to take orders or follow the lead of somebody else, then we're going to have a disruptive organization as well. And so you've got to kind of go through and figure out, okay, commonality is here. We've got some outliers here. We want to make sure we're paying attention to what the outliers are, that we're bringing people in the organization who also have these other behavior sets, because they can be successful too. But we've got to decide as an organization just what we pay attention to and what we hire to. Then we have to test it. And we want to test very gently as we implement a hiring system using some of the tools we're going to talk about in just a bit. We want to do it in a way that doesn't just completely upend our recruiting process if we're wrong. So we want to look at knowledge, skills, abilities, those are always going to be important. But as we implement these behaviors, maybe we start with just one thing in the system, and we start, let's say, with the employment application process, and we're going to focus on just this job, and we're going to change the application process and the job posting process around this job and see what our results are. Because we might find out as we evaluate it that this change was made a big difference. The quality of the candidates, maybe we got half as many applications, but the quality of the candidates of those, of that half that we did get is great. And on average, it's 50% better than what we were getting before. In other words, we're dissuading people who were not going to be good fits from even applying for the job. Maybe that's what we find. Or maybe we find that for some reason, all our applicants suddenly are not diverse. They all have similar backgrounds and demographic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and education backgrounds that aren't relevant to the job necessarily. So if we see that, then we need to go back and reevaluate. Where are we introducing bias into this process? But we've got to do it. And then maybe after we hire people, we look at them 30, 60, 90, 120 days out. If we hired them using this system, and say, how is their performance compared to other new hires? Are we really hiring better because of this? Maybe we're just making it more efficient because we're not kissing as many frogs during the employment process. But let's go look and see if after we hire them, if those are still valid hires. So I'm going to use the example of a data entry clerk again, just to start to talk through some of the concepts. First of all, I like the idea that in your job description, you right up front say in the job description, these are the key behaviors for success in this role. And we're talking about a data entry clerk here, the ability to reliably work a set schedule, work at a fast pace with high attention to detail, follow strict procedures to complete repetitive tasks. That's really difficult for people like me. And the ability to self-manage and improve performance based on ongoing feedback. So like if somebody gets their numbers every day, their quality numbers and their production numbers, and they can go in and self-correct and look at the quality issues that they had and fix them without having to sit down with a manager every time. Maybe that's really key especially in a large data entry workplace. And the ability to work independently with very little interpersonal interaction. These are all behavior traits, right? These are all abilities that are not about necessarily the ability to actually, punch keys on a keyboard, much more about the ability to, have the mindset and the focus and satisfaction that comes from doing that kind of work. So we have that right there in the job description. And then we can take that over to a job posting. And I apologize for all the words. I hate slides with words. I just couldn't figure out a way to do this that would be more helpful for you. But so we're a fast growing biomedical manufacturing company. This data entry, and I'm a big believer in describing in job postings why the position matters, telling candidates that this is why this is meaningful work. This is why this is purpose. This is why it matters. But so this data entry position is key to meeting our commitments to our customers by supporting manufacturing teams' very tight production schedule. Data entry delays result in costly manufacturing delays. So we're trying to support our customers, and this is why this job is important. We've got to get this job done right and quickly so that we get stuff out the door to customers. The successful data entry clerk will be able to perform repetitive computer tasks while strictly following detailed procedures to address a variety of variables. Again, so we're telling them these are the behaviors that we're looking for. And believe me, somebody like me who says repetitive computer tasks and detailed procedures is going to be dissuaded from really reading much further. They'll also be able to work at a rapid pace with a very high level of accuracy. And this position receives daily metrics with both production, output, and quality accuracy measures. So we're telling them we're going to give you ongoing feedback. You're going to get a lot of feedback, especially apparently from everything I was seeing, the younger emerging workforce. I hate to use generational labels, but they do seem to like more ongoing feedback. And they don't, contrary, I think, to popular opinion, they don't want their hands held. They just want to know how they're doing. They want to know how where they're rating against performance expectations. And I'm a big believer in metrics and numbers that do that rather than managers having to sit down and more subjectively talk to individuals every day about their performance. And then again, this is a professional environment and we're very supportive, but there are very few opportunities for interactions with others. This is a low sociability position. So somebody with very low sociability is going to be a lot better in this job. And the position's scheduled, so it's structured. You've got a fixed, there's no ambiguity about when you're supposed to be here. And some people love that structure. A lot of other people hate it. And we're seeing that people begging to return to the office while other employees never want to return to the office. Employees who don't want to return to the office and want to work remote, but they want to stay on a fixed schedule. They know they need that accountability. So I'm going to jump over to a real life one. This is a section out of our job postings for analysts. Imperative is a background investigations company, and most of my employees are doing not quite data entry, but very high level data entry, but in a lot of problem solving too. And this is an excerpt out of our job posting for an analyst position. And I tell them right out up front, if you're our ideal candidate, here's what you look like. And here's what you're not. You're not a jerk, a know-it-all, a drama royalty, or an excuse maker. And so I'm telling them both, here's who. And I don't think anybody's ever going to self-select out because you're not a jerk, a know-it-all, a drama royalty, or an excuse maker, because those people don't think they are that. But we found that our really successful employees in that role don't like working with jerks, know-it-alls, drama royalty, or excuse makers. And so we know that by, or at least it's a gut feeling on my part, that telling the ideal candidate, hey, you're not going to have to work with these people, these kind of people, may be a draw to them to continue. But if they've gotten through those first 5 or 6 bullet points, they know if this is a fit for them or not. And so when we post that job, we can see, hopefully, that that we're that applicant will see that this is a job that's a good fit for them, or they will self-select out. And I think we should throw a party if we implement this and we see that the number of applications that we're actually getting in are reduced by 30 or 50%, but that most of them who get through our process are qualified, and as far as behavior and the rest of the requirements for the job, then what we've done is just cut our overhead costs for hiring significantly, because we're not having to touch all those applications and follow up with those applicants, hopefully, and all the things that come with that. So that's the job posting. Now let's jump over to the application for employment. Most of us are on some sort of electronic applicant tracking system, or at least a basic online application of some sort. Most of those systems now will let you create a custom employment application for your candidates. I think that's almost a no-brainer. Why, your data entry role, where somebody's going to have to be detail oriented and work at filling out forms online all day long, why not just give them a little test in how they fill out the application? Can they do a little bit more tedious work as they fill out the application? But then your sales folks, on the flip side, you probably don't want to make them go through depending on which kind of sales you're doing, you may not want them to go through a really detailed sales process or application process, because salespeople like to toot their own horn and tell you how great they are and what about their successes, and they want to move on. They're not getting a salesperson to fill out a long, detailed application is probably going to run off some of your best salespeople. But let's say your sales manager is in a position where they need some salespeople who will actually fill out the dang CRM and give us the notes that we need about their prospects and their activity and all that, and they're really struggling with it. Maybe we beef up that on the application process, make it a little bit more detailed, so that we can maybe weed out those people who can't even give us 5 minutes or 10 minutes of attention online to fill out an application. And then the other thing about your application is, I've never understood why we focus so heavily on position titles, which from organization to organization means nothing. You walk into a bank and almost everybody's a VP. So what does that really mean? But why, I'm much more interested in what the actual job duties were. And then why not ask them, especially if you're using an online application so you don't have to recreate it every time. But what made you successful in this role? What kind of things made you, what did you accomplish? What were your accomplishments in this role? And then give them room to actually discuss the reason they termed. Why did they leave that employment? And 2, 3, especially if it's a text box or something with a lot of room in it, that kind of tells them, I want to know, I want to hear about this. And you'll get whatever feedback they give you, whether it's almost none or whether they're very outgoing and verbose and give you a lot of information, either one of those tell you something. And the more verbose ones are going to tell you more about their own behaviors, and including, are they the people who always blame somebody else for the issues, or are they the people who take responsibility? Or when you're talking about their successes, are they going to talk about, how awesome they were, or are they going to talk about how they were part of a team that accomplished something? And depending on your organization, depending on the role and the team that this person participates with, either one of those could be the right thing, right? There's not bad behavior. What there are is bad behavior or behavior that doesn't fit with a specific job. And then I'm a big believer in using testing systems to measure candidates' knowledge, skills, and abilities. But you can also, we use one called Test Gorilla, testgorilla.com. I don't get any commission from it, but they let us create custom questions. And this question on the left side of the screen is one that we ask. And it's really just a writing prompt because I need to see if this person can put grammar, punctuation, and spelling together in a sentence that makes sense. But I use this prompt as another reminder to the person about the job they're signing up for. I really am not that interested most of the time about what their actual responses are beyond how accurate it is. But sometimes it's illustrative. And we also see that sometimes people drop out of the process right here. And so that's helpful to know as well. So asking, wherever you can, reiterating that these are concerns. This is how we do things. This is what the world's like doing this job. Some people are not going to like to do that. Other people are going to think, oh yes, sign me up, and that's what we want. And then behavioral assessments. As I said, I'm a big, I think the technology has gotten better and better over the years. This is actually my talent assessments map, which is a combination of the Holland Code, Myers-Briggs, and DISC. And I'm not a big fan of Myers-Briggs, to be honest, but I do like Holland Code, the motivators. I think those are very interesting. I've been playing with those for the last couple of years, and I think there's something really to that. And for years, I've been using DISC, whether it's DISC or Predictive Index or Culture Index or any of these other ones. They're basically all the same science on the back end, and focusing on those four major behavioral assessment behavior criteria. I'm a big believer in them, and the question is when do you implement that? And so let's say we've done it, we've had everybody on our team. We know what a decent profile looks like. Like my profile there at the bottom is horrible. You wouldn't want that for a real detailed oriented position. But if we have an idea of what is really successful, then we need a range. And that's what I like about how Talent Insights does this, because that's the top range is the red and the lower range is the blue. And so it gives us some room for variability. And so, because none of us are all the same every single day. So it gives us a little bit of a range. But if I know what I'm looking for in that position, this helps me sort candidates. I will never eliminate a candidate based on a behavioral assessment, but I will sort them. And I will say, look, I've got this group of candidates who all have the knowledge, skills, and abilities I want. And here are the ones whose behaviors most match the people who are successful. We're going to start with these candidates because we got to have something to start them with, right? We're not going to interview all 20 applicants. And so we're going to at least look at the behaviors as a way of saying, okay, these 5 really match our general profile for a successful employee. Many employers disagree with running with when you introduce the behavioral assessment or disagree about when to introduce it. I'm a big believer in doing it right up front. I like it right there with the application. So I can go through applications and say, okay, this person meets the criteria, but oh, look, they're a giant extrovert like I am. They need a lot of sociability. They are not going to like this job. Every time I've made that exception, it's backfired on me. Every time I've hired an extrovert for that that analyst job, it has backfired on me over the years. I'm gonna probably still keep doing it as I see somebody who I think, I definitely want to give them a chance, because again, I'm not strictly excluding people based on the behavioral assessment. But I think it's a really good tool to sort candidates and to prepare for the interview, because now we've got a lot of information about them about their core behaviors from what we've seen in the application process, the fact that they even applied for the job, if they read the job posting, how they interacted with us during the application process, what their behavioral assessment told us. And so now we're preparing for an interview with this person. And one of the things I really like about, I went too far. What I really like about the map and some of the other tools that are out there, predictive index and other ones, they help you build your structured interview. And so if this is what this person's profile really looks like, here are ways that they bring value to the organization, but here are challenges they may face in the organization. And so let's design behavioral event interviewing questions around that to really explore what this candidate's strengths and weaknesses are, and how those behaviors have been reflected in their work relationships and in their on the job performance over the years. And we could do 8 hours on behavioral event interviewing, but I think it's extremely valuable. I think it's still a lot better than most of the other interview styles that are out there. But this is the one place where I'm going to move away from making sure every applicant gets asked the same question. I'm a big believer in having that very structured interview that everybody goes through. But when I see there's a gap between this behavior that we think we expect in this job and this behavior, this otherwise qualified candidate who I'm really interested in is demonstrating, I'm going to follow up with them, and I'm ask them, tell me about a time where you were frustrated because you felt like the organization was making decisions too slow, if that's what I see, and I know that's relevant to the job. And so this is the one place where I really start to customize the job interview questions to the applicant. So we select our applicant. It's still not too late to change our minds. And this is when we need to start doing reference checks or employment verifications for sure. And I don't know if you saw it, but last year, Charter Spectrum, got nailed for $7 billion because basically, they hired someone to install and repair internet and cable TV on behalf of Charter. They sent this guy to his name was Roy Holden. They sent him to the home of an 83-year-old to fix her internet. Then he returned the next day in his Charter uniform, driving his Charter van to rob her, and he ultimately killed her in her own home. He's now in prison, and of course, the woman's family sued Charter, claiming they failed to conduct basic due diligence in attempting to verify his previous employment. Apparently, according to testimony, Charter didn't verify any of his previous employment, and he had been terminated from previous employment for misconduct and forgery. Maybe that wouldn't have made a difference. Maybe it would have, but we won't ever know because Charter didn't check it. And so we don't know if those employers would have even told them anything. Maybe they wouldn't have, but at least Charter would have protected themselves and mitigated their risk by asking some basic questions. And so last fall, a jury in Dallas awarded the family $7 billion. So in the notes, I've got a set of questions that I suggest you consider asking that go straight to behavior. Tell me, and it's like a behavioral event interview for that previous employer. And if they refuse to answer, at least you've done your due diligence in trying to answer it, ask those questions, and you can document it. And then the other part is verify everything the applicant told you, right? That seems to be an obvious issue. And, let's make sure that that we've asked them already about criminal history, given them a chance to tell us the truth. And now we'll do the criminal background check and see if it's true. And the gospel according to Coffey, commandment number 1 is if they lie to you coming in the door, it's unreasonable to expect their behavior to change after you hire them. And certainly that goes directly to behavior, right? If you've got a great process in place where you're asking all the right questions, all the background check should be is a lie detector test. And I would be out of business if all your applicants were honest, but they're not. And so you need to know that, and you need to go in whatever processes you use, verify everything that they tell you that you can verify. Maybe they tell you about education, and education is not required for the job, but they claim a degree. Pick up the phone and call that registrar, even if you don't use your background screening partner, and just call that school and try to verify that degree. We see more people lying about their education and employment than lying about their criminal history. So if they come into you lying in the door, it's not reasonable to expect their behavior to change. So go ahead and verify that stuff. Oh, and I have a beautiful blank slide here. I don't know why. So we're right here at the end, but social media comes up a lot. And I've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to talk employers out of using social media, and I've really changed my mind. It's just become too prevalent, and it's going to boil down just like that charter case I mentioned. If it's there and it's publicly accessible, the employer is going to be expected to know, especially if there's threatening or coercive behavior or other behavior that is a red flag, and something goes wrong. The employer is going to have a problem mitigating their liability now if they haven't at least looked at the person's public online profile. And I go in depth in the notes to talking about how to make sure you're not introducing bias by collecting protected class information, things like that. And that's really important. But I think you're going to have to start really considering social media searches at some level. Just looking for at least really negative, bad behavior that can impact the workplace, but also put the employer at risk. And finally, after we hire them, I think that trained manager who understands the behavioral assessment process and is familiar with their own behavioral assessment really ought to sit down with that new hire and say, okay, here's my behavioral assessment. Let me share this with you. Here's how I communicate. Here's how I like to receive communication. Like my team, I tell them, I need emails with bullet points, no long paragraphs, no more than 4 or 5 bullet points, please. Unless it's just something really critical, then it probably needs to be a telephone call or a Zoom call. But I've got employees who are the exact opposite. They need a lot of detail. They need long paragraphs with all the information. And I understand that. And so if I want to get something from them, I will modify my behavior and do that for them. But I still ask them the same way to come back to me and communicate with me in a certain style. I'm not going to penalize them if they don't, but if we're all both going to be effective, it's best that we both know. Some organizations have their whole team take the same assessment, and then they share with each other the results. And I've even been in organizations where on the cubicle walls or the desk doors, they have people's profiles. I've even seen them in profiles and signature lines. And so that tells us these people are really focused on making sure that everybody understands what those mean. But okay, well, I see this particular behavior profile for Mike, and so I know this is how I need to communicate with Mike, or this is why Mike may be stressed in a meeting, or Mike will throw out quick answers. I do, and drives my team crazy. I'm, highly intuitive, and I will come up with an answer before I even know what the results are. But I know my team, who are mostly the exact opposite of me, they need to process. So we'll present an issue, talk through the issues, the items related to it, and then I'll say, come back next week and let's with your ideas on this. And I will make myself be patient and give them time to process. But if we don't know that about each other and we're just learning it the hard way by, bumping heads, that's not a great way to build an organization. So those assessments can be really helpful in your team and understanding each other's natural behaviors. Good Morning HR is my podcast that we drop every Thursday. Every one of them is approved for HRCI and SHRM recertification credit. And they're all worth at least half an hour. And some go as long as an hour if I really get to talking like I did today. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I'm going to go through your questions. We're out of time, but I'm going to answer the questions that are here. But watch your email if you're watching this live, and you'll have an email soon to include all the HRCI stuff with a survey. And again, if you're watching this online, there should be a slide right about now. If you're watching the recording, that will give you the keyword, and you go to imperativeinfo.com/webinars and go to this webinars page, and you will be able to get the research credit there. Okay, let me see. Tom said, if I have two candidates where one has a stronger technical skills in the resume, but the other has stronger, better behavioral skills, how do I select the latter without getting sued? Well, what are you going to get sued for, Tom? The other thing you're going to get sued for is if you're creating a Title VII disparate impact claim. And so you're not talking about just two candidates here. You have to be talking about a broader range of candidates to create disparate impact, unless there's some claim of an intentional bias directly. I chose this person because they were under 40 or whatever. But if you have, and I'm not saying I want to necessarily choose the stronger, the person who aligns more with behavior than the stronger technical candidate. But there are issues where I may not need a PhD in microbiology for somebody who's going to work in a food lab. That master's degree or that undergraduate degree is fine. And if that person with the PhD is a bull in a china shop with personal relationships in the office and is not somebody who works well with a team and all those things, then I must say, this is what this is what we've documented. It's how we made the decision. And we chose somebody who is much more of a team player, who works well with others, who's much more adaptable than this other person, just from our own, from our own experience with them, our own interviews, the things they told us during the interview, and the totality of information. There was just a court decision recently that said fit is a reasonable thing for employers to consider. The EEOC did sue an employer trying to get them to in trouble for fit, because that was the decision that the employer made, that this person wasn't the right fit. But in fact, the court disagreed and said, fit, when it's not obviously biased, does make sense. And so if that's the case, then I think you're safe there. But you want to have a process where you really documented how you got to this point where we said these are the behaviors that are relevant. And you definitely don't want to hire somebody who's not qualified technically to do the job just because they have the right behavioral skills, unless it's a job that you can easily train somebody for. Barbara, sometimes we managers let employees get into bad habits at work before we address the issues, which can lead to dissatisfaction and frustration. If we can address issues immediately, often they can be clarified and addressed. That's so right. And those bad habits are somebody's core behaviors in responding to a certain situation coming to play. And so I found that when most employees, when they get into bad habits, that's a leadership issue. Like you said, we let them get into that. Or maybe we've created an environment where we're bringing out certain behaviors in somebody. So if somebody is working in a positive, healthy environment, this behavior would never exhibit itself, because this is how this person responds under stress, to negative stimulus. But if we've got a workplace where we don't have that, then, and that's a leadership issue, I think, then we would have never seen that from that employee. So I think you're right, though, Barbara. The quicker we address performance should be always addressed as it happens, to the extent that we can. Oh, Deidre, thank you. Replicability. That's the replicability crisis in social studies. Thank you. Tom again, regarding the data entry clerk, key behaviors for success. The challenge I wrestle with is that, to steal a term from John Gordon, both energy vampires and energy givers can do those bullet points. So how can we stand on solid ground selecting the energy givers over the energy vampires? I think it goes back to what we were talking about. You're going to have to figure out in your organization what the key behaviors are. But then when we're interviewing people and we pick up that this person is an energy vampire, that they're going to suck the life out of the people they work with, that they are not going to work in our environment. They're not affirming. They're not team oriented. They're not somebody who helps construct and build a successful team. Then we just need to realize that those are the choices we make. All right. And I if we've got good documentation, and I will trust the courts to know that, and the courts, not the EEOC. I trust the courts. I don't necessarily trust the EEOC to be impartial, but I'm gonna trust that if I have to defend this, which is very unlikely, let's be honest. I mean, for the number of employees in the U.S., there are relatively few lawsuits related to this stuff. But I'm gonna say this is how we made the decision. I'm gonna document it, and I'm gonna move on. I'm very comfortable doing that. Now, every organization is different, and your risk profile is different, and the controls you have in place to keep managers from being knuckleheads and doing things that you don't want them to do is going to be different. But I think saying, okay, this is somebody who is clearly going to be disruptive in our organization, that's fine. Now, I do think, again, not going, I don't want us to get too strict on behavior sets that we eliminate otherwise fully qualified candidates just on their face. And quite honestly, if we don't do that, then we are going to, during the interview process and everything else, we're going to get a lot better insight into somebody than we get just from the employment application or a behavioral assessment or something like that. Diana, Mike, what are your thoughts on asking the candidate about their behavior motivators? For example, if I'm motivated by autonomy, a job with heavy supervision would be demotivating for me. Wouldn't it be helpful to ask the candidates for their insight? I don't have a problem asking the candidates for their insight, but what I find is that most candidates are going to either tell you what they think you want to know, or they're so freaking unself-aware that they don't know what they really want. It's like when you ask people what their values are initially, and then you do an exercise to help them develop what their real values are, there's often a giant gap there. So I don't have a problem asking them, but I would rather have it be more objective, and like whether it's predictive index or talent insights or a lot of culture index and a lot of the others. They provide written verbose summaries of what the personality is, and I like to hand that to, and I share that stuff with applicants. And at the interview, I'll say, I'll share it with them and say, hey, read this. Tell me what you think about it. Give me your feedback about what you think. How accurate it was. Where do you disagree with it? And we have conversations around it. That's the way I handle it, because I just find people aren't as self-aware as and my wife would tell you I'm probably not either, as they think they are. So I appreciate everybody joining us. I hope you enjoy, and wow, and about half of you stuck around to the very end, so I appreciate that too. I took more time than anticipated, but I do appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a great summer, and be safe, do good, keep your chin up.